Now, can somebody read Exodus 10 and Exodus 10 and verse 13?
And Moses stretched forth his rod over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon the land all that day and all that night. And when it was morning, the east wind brought the locusts.
So this is one of these plagues, this judgment's coming upon Egypt. And I just find it interesting, and we're going to look at this a bit later, but I just want to mention it now. Where did God bring these locusts from?
East.
So if you go east of Egypt, where do you end up?
Saudi Arabia.
No, that's in that west.
No, that's east, moving towards Asia. Yeah. That takes you to the Arabian Peninsula, Saudi Arabia. As that's just interesting that here, locusts are pictured as this plague that is brought out of Arabia to judge, in this case, Egypt, to judge those that had been persecuting God's people. Now, can we turn to Deuteronomy 28?
Can I just say something just before we leave Exodus? I'm probably jumping ahead, but I noticed in verse 19 that the Lord turned a mighty strong west wind, which took away the locusts and cast them into the Red Sea. So he's taken them back the way that they've come, but he's dumped them in the water.
That is interesting. Because like I'm just thinking of the other plagues, like the frogs. When you got rid of those, they all just died and just lay in stinking piles all over Egypt. But with this one, for some reason, he's actually completely removed them back the way they came and chucked them in the Red Sea.
I don't know if that bears anything on our study or not, but I just thought it was interesting.
Now, in Deuteronomy 28, this is again a list of the things that punishment God would bring against his people if they rebelled against him. In verse 15, we're introduced that he says, if you will not hearken unto the voice of the Lord to do his commandments, which I command thee this day, all these curses shall come upon thee and overtake thee. And can someone read Deuteronomy 28, verse 38 to 42?
Thou shalt carry much seed out into the field, and shalt gather but little in, for the locust shall consume it. Thou shalt plant vineyards and dress them, but thou shalt drink of the wine, but shalt neither drink of the wine, nor gather the grapes, for the worms shall eat them. Thou shalt have olive trees throughout all thy coasts, but thou shalt not anoint thyself with the oil, for thine olive shall cast his fruit. Thou shalt beget sons and daughters, but they shall not enjoy them, for they shall go into captivity. To where?
To 42.
All the trees and fruit of the land shall the locusts consume. Time of famine.
Yeah.
Yes.
And so again, there in that context, what are the locusts being presented as? Well, how are they used in there? What is their role?
Devour. Eat up. Devastate.
Yep. And who is that going to be brought against? Who are they going to be used to plague?
The Israelites, is it? If they're disobedient.
Yep. The locusts here are used as a specific plague that God mentioned, that he's going to use the locust to judge his own people if they apostatize. And we see a similar thing in oh yes, Galen.
I noticed that it's not it's when the food is ripe that it's taken away. It's not like it's not prevented from growing. See, thou shalt plant vineyards and dress them. So they're tending to the vineyards, but then they're not going to be gathering the grapes because the worms shall eat them, which tells me that the grapes are going to be there and they're all ready to go, as it were, but the worms are going to move it. The olive will cast his fruit. Sons and daughters are being begotten, but they're being taken away. So it's interesting that it's not so even in verse 38, thou shalt carry much seed out into the field and shalt gather but little in. So there is some growing. It's growing, but they just can't, the locusts consume it. Well, for the locust to be able to consume it, there has to be green bits there.
Yes, Merlin?
I think that's part of the curse, that the people actually had to work hard to produce what they wanted to eat and grow and whatever, but then they couldn't consume it. They couldn't eat it. That was part of the curse. So it was the working hard and yet not getting any results from that working hard. All part of the curse.
Petra.
The picture that brought to mind for me is my 20 years in the desert with the GC. A whole lot of effort and other resources are put into outreach, but the fruit of it is sparse. So it's people who know but are not fully surrendering to God. I'm talking in a general sense, not individuals. So that the fruit is not there for them.
I like that imagery as well, that if they refuse to bring forth fruit in their life, they wouldn't get to eat fruit, and physical fruit. It's like, if they weren't bringing forth spiritual fruit unto God, the locusts would take the physical fruit away from them. Because those locusts were a punishment for their apostasy and rebellion against God, for turning away from him. And so they sort of were to bring upon God's people so that their physical life sort of represented their spiritual one. They weren't going to bring forth fruits unto God. They weren't going to get fruits from their field. And so in that sense, it's sort of that you say that's spiritual poetic justice, if you would, or if for all the people need to do for the plagues to disappear is to start bringing forth fruit unto God in their lives, and he would send it back. Actually, if we can turn to 1 Kings, in 1 Kings chapter 8, Solomon's prayer, and in this prayer of dedication, he's dedicating the temple, and he prays to God about his people. You know, if your people turn away and rebel against you and do this, and then he asks God that, you know, when they come again, and forgive them and restore them. Petra.
It also fits with me with the commandments. God asked the people in Exodus 19 to come into relationship with him so that he could give them the fruit that would be represented by the commandments, or covered, described, whatever you want to call it. But the people said, hey, great plan, this outline, the 10 commandments, whatever, and we'll do that. But God's plan was for him to do that. When they chose to do it, it fell over. They couldn't do it. It wasn't theirs to do. And the same with whether you're tending the ground or tending, spiritual needs around you. If you're trying to do it, even if you're trying to do it for God, that's not his plan. He's the husbandman, and he's the chief gardener. And if we try to bypass him, even if we have good intentions, then that fruit is going to fail. It's not designed to be gardened by us. Him in us, yes, but us by ourselves with great intentions, no.
Can someone read 1 Kings chapter 8 verse 37 through to 40?
If there be in the land famine, if there be pestilence, blasting, mildew, locust, or if there be caterpillar, if their enemy besiege them in the land of their cities, whatsoever plague, whatsoever sickness there be, what prayer and supplication soever be made by any man, or by all thy people Israel, which shall know every man the plague of his own heart, and spread forth his hands toward this house, then hear thou in heaven thy dwelling place, and forgive, and do, and give to every man according to his ways, whose heart thou knowest, for thou, even thou only, knowest the hearts of all the children of men, that they may fear thee in all the days that they live in the land which thou gavest unto our fathers. Did you want any more, or is that it?
No, that's fine. That's fine.
Okay.
This is Solomon's prayer to God, and he talks about, you know, all the famines, pestilence, mildew, locusts, and caterpillars that God would bring against his people in judgment. And what does he go on there after he speaks about all these judgments that God would bring upon his people? What does he move on to talk about next?
Prayer and supplication.
Yep. So again, in these judgments, what is the purpose of these judgments then? Jaylene.
It's very interesting that however they do it, you know, whatever prayer and supplication is made, but they shall know every man the plague of his own heart. The plague of his own heart. That's interesting choice of words, Because normally plague and our own hearts is not usually something we put together in the same sentence. It's not usually how we find those two words written throughout scripture. Plague is, you got the 7 last plagues, you've got the plagues of Egypt. They're normally something horrendous, right up there on the scale of things. But to equate that with our own hearts is sobering.
Margaret, and then Merlene, and then Petra.
In the side panel, of my Bible, it says spiritual disease. So they're not walking with the Lord. When every man knows the plague of his own heart, you know what you're doing wrong, and spiritually they're not right with the Lord.
Yeah, Merlene.
Yes, I just thought different Bibles might have different ideas or different wording rather than plague. Just wondered if we've got other versions other than KJV.
I will just look that up online now. Just a second. So NIV has the afflictions of their own hearts, being aware of the afflictions of their own hearts. So does ESV.
Good News says heartfelt sorrow.
Plagues. So they seem to oscillate between plagues or affliction. Yeah, again, ASV's plagues again. Yeah, these versions, it's oscillating between plagues and afflictions. And I guess that heartfelt sorrow is a similar idea.
It's a nonsense, it's a plague. Because every man knows his own heart. Our own hearts are, what are they? Wretched and despicable things. And we don't know them. So God's brought it to our acknowledgement so that then we can ask for forgiveness and he can give us a new one.
Yeah.
I think in this case, plague is actually the apt word.
Yeah.
More so than the other ones.
It's interesting. ISV translates it, each praying out of his own hurting heart. And so, I mean, I think, like you're saying, plague is the correct word there, but these other versions that have tried to make it more dynamic, it's like, out of your own hurting heart, recognize that your heart is damaged, that your heart is the problem, and it's a recognition of that. And I think, as Ralph said, the heart is desperately wicked and deceitful above all things. Who can know it? And so it's coming to the recognition of the condition of our hearts.
Yeah.
We're not knowing our hearts, but we're knowing the condition, that the plague, the deceitfulness of our own hearts that has caused us to rebel against God, and coming to God with that is the recognition that he's sort of seeking. Petra.
So again, here we see judgment and mercy mixed. because we're seeing judgment for the point of repentance. And any time that we see thing of plagues and locusts anywhere, yeah, the whole spiritual condition is really what should come to mind, at least as an option, depending on the context.
It actually makes me think of Ahab when he turns up to Elijah after they've had, this 3.5 years of no rain. And he says, you troubler of Israel, this drought's come upon us because of you. And he's like, no, it's not me, it's because of you and your rebellion. There's been a drought of the knowledge of God's word in Israel for so long. So God sent you a physical drought to physically show you your spiritual condition. And I think that's what it's saying here. When my people are suffering under these physical plagues and they come in repentance, recognizing the plague of their own heart, then I will heal them. And so again, it's the plagues that God sent in judgment are to mirror the spiritual condition of his people. And I find it interesting, after Solomon prays this prayer, God answers him, and we're going to jump to 2 Chronicles 7. And God answers him. And can someone read from verse 11 to 14?
Chronicles 7:11 to 14. Thus Solomon finished the house of the Lord and the king's house, and all that came into Solomon's heart to make in the house of the Lord, and in all his own house he prosperously effected. And the Lord appeared to Solomon by night and said unto him, I have heard thy prayer, and have chosen this place to myself for a house of sacrifice. If I shut up heaven that there be no rain, or if I command the locust to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, if my people, which are called by my name, shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face, turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven, will forgive their sin, and will heal their land.
So again, there in God responding to Solomon's prayer. Again, what are the things that he picks up on there?
The same thing, curses for disobedience and blessings when you obey.
And so the same thing we've seen with all these trumpets. The purpose of these judgments is to bring about repentance, to try to bring God's people back from their apostasy. Now, if we can jump back into Revelation 9. And in Revelation 9, verses 1 to 12, that looks at this fifth trumpet. We've mentioned the locusts, but there are actually 3 other animals that are mentioned in this passage. And so the question is, we're going to look at what are these 4 animals, and how does that help us locate where this judgment's coming from? Galen.
Is there any significance that the locusts came out of the smoke which came out of the pit, as far as the judgment is concerned, or the what could be, as we go through the study and look at the real the historical aspect, would there be anything that would sort of work with that?
Yeah, it's sort of like a chain of events. This bottomless pit, this sort of demonic habitation is opened up, and this smoke of judgment and destruction that blocks out the light, that men's hearts are darkened and minds are darkened and their eyes are darkened, they can't see or understand or believe, and then from that darkness, this destruction that consumes the land comes forward.
So that scenario would work in light of the historical event or events that you've got lined up?
Yeah, I think it does.
I was just curious for when we get that far, that's all. So
Yeah, I mean the symbolism of what the bottomless pit and the smoke and all that represents, I think is significant in when we look at its fulfillment and how this judgment came upon the Roman Empire. So back in there in Revelation 9, what are the 4 animals mentioned?
I can only see locust, scorpion, and horses. I can't find the 4th one.
Of lions.
Yep.
I missed that one.
Yeah, in verse 8, they have teeth of lions.
Thank you.
But it,
Yep, Merlin.
It's still only referring to locusts. That's just a description of the locusts. It's still only the one thing.
Yes, it is. Yes. Yep. Yes, it is. There's this the locusts are what, you know, go and do this destruction that consume and destroy and torment. But you know, these aren't, well, they're not normal locusts. It's symbolic significance to them. You know, that they have got tails of scorpions. You know, the locusts, what does it say? They look like horses, or they're in the shape of horses.
Beginning of verse 7.
Yeah.
This is head under battle. You don't often hear locusts compared to or described by being similar to horses.
Yeah.
Very.
And the shape of the locusts were like unto horses prepared to battle.
It's got to do with how many there were too, hasn't it? Like lots and lots and lots of them.
Yeah. Well, actually, if we go to the book of Judges, in Judges, where are we? Whoops, no, that's the wrong book. Judges 7, verse 12.
The Midianites and the Amalekites and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude, and their camels were without number, as the sand by the seaside for multitude.
Now, the word for grasshopper there is also the same as locusts. Many other versions translated as locusts. Yes, Galen.
The fact that the locusts and the plagues came out of the east, and this is the children of the east. Would that have any significance at all?
Yes, yes, I believe it does. That locusts are very much connected to that area of Arabia, to the east, the children of the east. Whether it's here in Judges or with the Exodus, locusts are coming out of the deserts in Arabia.
Okay, I just thought. Sorry, thanks.
Same with scorpions too, isn't it? They live in the desert.
Do you want to read Deuteronomy 8:15 for us, Ralph?
He led thee through that great and terrible wilderness, wherein were fiery serpents and scorpions and drought, where there was no water, who brought thee forth water out of the rock of flint.
So that talks about them wandering around in the deserts of Arabia in the 40 years. And again, it speaks of, the two animals mentions as snakes and scorpions dwelling in Arabia.
What verse was that, please, Matthew?
Deuteronomy 8:15.
It's times like these where you're grateful for where you live yourself at times, isn't it?
As you're saying that, I am very conscious that we do have some Australians, people joining us from Australia. And of all the dangerous places to live in the world, Australia is definitely up there. We're quite safe over this side of the ditch, but
Yeah.
And you don't have to be in the desert here either.
No.
So yeah, we got locusts, or animals connected with Arabia, with the east. Scorpions also with that Arabian Peninsula. And it's interesting, lions and horses are also connected with that area. Although lions are not very common there now, the Asiatic lion, was very prominent through that whole area. And horses as well, the Arabian horses, legendary, has made a very big name for itself. So all four of these animals are animals that come from or are located in the Arabian Peninsula. Petra.
So we have Babylon represented by a lion, don't we? And also horses through scripture can be symbolic of a dependence on power, human power. They had a lot of faith when they had horses. They had a lot of confidence in having horses to go to war instead of just foot soldiers. So there's a dependence on human power, at least in my head, linked with that horse in scripture.
Did we have someone else's hand up?
I was just going to mention about Babylon, but Petra, we were thinking along the same lines.
Yeah. Yes, but the Asiatic, the Asiatic lion was very prominent through Middle East. It became extinct in Arabia in the 1900s, early 1900s. But before that, it had a very prominent role in like culturally, symbolically, as that symbol of power of nation. As you mentioned, Babylon being the lion. Samson himself fought a lion. He was walking along the road. In Israel, one of the prophets that God told him to return back and not eat, but then someone else said, "Come back and stay at my place." And because he had disobeyed, it says a lion went and attacked him. So around the Middle East, and especially in Arabia, lions were very prominent. So out of these 4 animals, it's interesting, all of them we can locate in Arabia. So that's our first sort of hint that looking at this judgment of this 5th trumpet seems to be pointing us towards this power or this judgment coming up out of Arabia to judge what is left of the Roman Empire at that time. Now, can somebody read for me Revelation 9, verses 3 to 5?
And there came out of the smoke locusts upon the earth, and upon them were given power as the scorpions of the earth have power. And it was commanded them that they should not hurt the grass of the earth, neither any green thing, neither any tree, but only those men which have not the seal of God in their foreheads. And to them it was given that they should not kill them, but they should be tormented 5 months. And their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he strikes a man. Was it 5 or 6 as well?
That's fine. That's fine.
Thank you.
Okay. Now, one of the first things that jumped out to me, we're looking at locusts. These locusts being this judgment brought upon them. It seems strange what the locusts are said that they're going to do, or rather, what are they not going to attack in there? What are the locusts not going to be feeding
They're
on?
not to hurt the grass or any green thing or any trees. Only men which do not have the seal of God in their foreheads.
And so we've got the idea that these locusts, that they're not going to hurt any trees. This judgment is not upon the land; it's only upon the people that have not got the seal of God. Okay, so there are going to be people that have the seal of God that are not going to be affected. Okay, we're told that the green things, the trees and stuff, are not going to be affected. Unlike a lot of the previous trumpets, where the invading armies caused destruction and just destroyed things wherever they went. Not just to the cities, but also to forest, to plantations, to just generally destroying stuff. But those who do not have the seal of God on their forehead, we're also told that to them it was not given that they should be killed, but only tormented. And so this isn't going to be a complete destruction. Petra.
So is there a parallel here to when probation is closed on the people of God, but is still open for those who haven't yet had opportunity in the end times?
I see what you're saying. There is sort of like a thematic parallel between the two. That this plague is still God calling people to repentance, while there are some that have been sealed already. Yeah, I'm just thinking of this time period though. It seems to me to be not necessarily referencing that probation's closed on God's people while it's still open to others, but rather that there are sort of the wheat and tares growing together. And it's not our job to sift out the tares, but rather in this case it's God who's trying to bring them to repentance, so that the harvest of wheat can be much greater.
That's certainly a lesson we could benefit from keeping in mind today. Would save a lot of toilet plunger outreach.
but the language of the seal of God is very interesting in here, because when I read that, immediately I think that's end time stuff. That's final events. The seal of God and the mark of the beast, that's all still future. But here it's referred back to something that's happening back in the trumpets. And so it seems that, that in a sense, the sealing of God's people is something that you could say has always been happening. It's only at the end time that sealing needs to be completed for the next stage to carry on, the next stage in this plan of salvation and final events to unfold. Gayleen.
I'm just wondering, the scorpions or the locusts that had stings like scorpions, they're going to be tormenting those that don't have the seal of God in their foreheads for 5 months. And given that this is prophetic, chances are that 5 months is also a prophetic time frame. But their torment was as the torment of a scorpion when he striketh a man. So what happens when someone is stung by a scorpion? Because I'm pretty sure that depending on scorpions, whether their pincers are bigger than their tail or their tail is bigger than their pincers, whichever one is the bigger of the two, that's the more dangerous part of them in that particular species. So I'm wondering what actually happens when one is stung by a scorpion of those varieties that are, really dangerous to people. And I'm wondering if that has any significance to this. What kind of medical stuff goes forward and why, the torment from that. I'm just wondering if there's a thing. Sorry, Petra.
Right, I don't know about in the Middle East, but the scorpions we had in South Africa, intense pain, you can count on that from the sting from the tail.
I did a little quick Google, and they were saying, what I found, the 1,000+ species of scorpions, there are only really, I think 7 they said that you actually need to be worried about as far as a threat to our life. Most of them, it's just really painful. And one of those does happen to live in the Arabian Peninsula, is quite a lethal scorpion, but I'm not sure how many other species of scorpions that actually live there that just have an incredibly painful sting. Yes, Gayleen.
So I'm just having a look in Wikipedia myself, and it says this, aside from, obviously they can be dangerous, it says the scorpion is a culturally significant animal appearing as a motif in art, especially in Islamic art in the Middle East. A scorpion motif is often woven into Turkish something or rather flat weave carpets for protection from their sting. The scorpion is perceived both as an embodiment of evil and as a protective force, such as a dervish's powers to combat evil. In Muslim folklore, the scorpion portrays human sexuality. Yeah, pass on that one. But interesting that it's in the Middle East, and it's an embodiment of evil. I wonder if that's got any take on that as well.
I think anything that can sting you and cause that much pain and death would definitely be seen as a symbol of evil. But yeah, that is interesting. Locusts being a symbol of judgment and plague, scorpions a symbol of evil, and these two ideas here are mixed together. Again, horses later on an animal of war, and again, lions a terrifying beast of ferocious destruction. All the symbols of these animals, just looking at that, you're expecting this sort of a satanic power to come out with a great army and terrible ferocity to attack what's left of the Roman Empire at this point.
I was just looking through the pioneers, and they come up with that smoke is to do with false teachings or false doctrines.
Yep.
It's fitting, like the beast coming out of the bottomless pit, or false teachings.
Galen.
Sorry to be annoying. I just found in this Wikipedia page, there's a late period bronze figure of Isis, and we know Isis is one of the Egyptian gods, to do with the Trinity and that sort of thing. But look how that's portrayed.
Like a scorpion.
Yeah, and I don't know if that's anything to do with it, or the fact that's to do with that part of whole sun worship thing, or interesting.
Okay. Now I just want to read out a section here. So far we've looked at this power coming out of the Arabian Peninsula to judge the Byzantine Empire, what's left of the Roman Empire, and we do see that fulfilled with the rise of Islam. These first 4 judgments upon Western Rome were sort of different Germanic tribes coming down, the Gauls and the Huns coming down to judge Western Rome, and then moving on from that, in 612 or 610 you have Muhammad began his prophetic ministry, and in 612 began his first major sort of military campaigns, and that carried on to overtake much of what was left in the Byzantine Empire. But what we've just read there about these locusts, this army that's going to swarm, not hurting the grass or the trees or any green thing, and then making a distinction between those that are judges, between those that have the seal of God and those that don't. This, what I'm about to read, is part of a decree, a letter written by Abu Bakr, who was Muhammad's sort of successor. I think his title was the one of the first of the rightly guided caliphs. This is what he says in this letter, writing to the rest of the Muslims. When you fight the battles of the Lord, acquit yourself like men, without turning your backs. But let not your victory be stained with the blood of women and children. Destroy no palm tree, nor burn any field of corns, cut down no fruit trees, nor do any mischief to cattle, only such as you kill to eat. When you make any covenant or article, stand to it, and be as good as your word. And as you go, you will find some religious persons who live retired in monasteries and purpose to themselves to serve God that way. Let them alone, neither kill them nor destroy their monasteries. And you will find another sort of people that belong to the synagogue of Satan, who have shaven crowns. Be sure you cleave their skulls and give them no quarter till they either turn Mohammedans or pay tribute. I'll pop that quote in the chat for anyone who's interested. Just a second.
That's supposedly the same as not having the seal of God in their foreheads, isn't it?
Is that out of the Quran?
No, that was a letter written by one of Muhammad's successors to the people. So that's not out of the Quran. That was
It'll be a cross reference to something in the Quran, because I've read something similar before. Like I've got a couple of real good Qurans here, and pardon?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
The Quran does have rules of war that do deal with similar things like that. But I just find that that's an interesting statement. One, not hurting any of the trees or grass, which is exactly what was spoken there in Revelation, but also making a difference between sort of the Christians that have the seal of God and those that don't, those that are faithful to God and those that are apostate. Galen.
So it said there about, those that are Christians and let them alone. Who are the ones with shaven heads? What would they represent? What group, or whether it be cultural or whatever would they be?
Did you ever used to watch Robin Hood and see Friar Tuck with his cut with the shaven thing? Yeah. That was a thing with priests. When they became priests, they'd get this haircut.
It was a certain order, though, wasn't it? It was a certain order.
Yeah, a certain order of monks and priests.
So then, according to that letter, he was differentiating between those ones and other people, other men who were men of God.
He's
That's
telling them,
interesting.
When you go to attack, you're going to come across two types of Christians. Okay, the first type, leave them alone. There's this second type. I'm referring to this particular order that of monks and priests that he was familiar with. He says when you find that second type, he says cleave their skulls.
It sounds almost Jesuitical oath language, doesn't it?
Yeah. Petra.
Might be where the saying "keep your hair on" came in, because it sounds like it was pretty abrupt for the fellas with shaven. The whole message in Revelation 9 here that we've been looking at with the fifth angel is very much a short, sharp, abrupt delivery. And we see that when we're looking through the beasts in Revelation. No, am I thinking Daniel? No, I'm thinking Daniel. In Daniel 8, where nothing could get in this one power's way, and yet when their time was done, the same transferred to the next power. So when God decides to draw a line or allow a line to be drawn, it can be quite direct.
Colin.
Yeah, thanks. G'day, everyone. I would second guess that his directive there wouldn't be directed at anything Catholic, though, on account that he married a very rich Catholic lady, and that's where he somehow branched out from, or maybe he was anti-Catholic as a result of that. I don't know, but I just wonder about that.
Maybe the second.
You think marrying his Catholic wife turned him against the religion?
Well, it might have done. She was pretty rich apparently, and yeah, I'm not too sure of the history of how one thing led to the other. But
yeah,
like Valdevieve points out very clearly in one of his studies, I think, or him and was the fella Dupuy, the old fella, how that in the Bible lands that you'll find that there's a Catholic church associated with a mosque and vice versa. They're very interwoven in that scene, which is quite puzzling when you think from Christian terms.
Yeah, well, I mean, there's a lot of, because they both share sort of the Old Testament to a certain extent. A lot of the same sites are significant to both religions.
Yeah, but I mean, they interact freely with each other. They like one mosque has got a Christian icon or something, or a 2-minute, in vice versa. A church will have some place for the Muslim to be able to pay their whatever lip service.
Yeah, well, I mean, a lot of them, like in for example, Constantinople, that the big church there that was built by Christians, but then when it was conquered, it became a mosque. And some of the artwork they sort of just plastered over, put Muslim artwork on top of the Christian stuff, and other stuff they kept. And I think now there was so much arguing over it that the guy in charge of it just turned it into a museum, sort of like a museum art gallery thing, because he was sick of the Christians and Muslims fighting over who was supposed to have it. But a lot of the times that was it. There would be this, big church, the Muslims would take over, and they're like, hey, we'll just turn that into a mosque. And if the Christians came back through, they're like, hey, we'll just turn that back into a church. And eventually, in some places, they just worked out how to coexist. And they're like, rather than just constantly fighting each other over it, there were periods of peace where they were allowed just to live together, and they just learned to sort of share and get along.
And leading on from that, I think there is something. I think that cleaving the heads is talking about Protestants. Just recollecting now, because I think Islam and the Roman Catholic and tolerate each other. And it was suggested in one of those studies also that Islam was formed as a counter. It was assisted by the Catholic Church to become a counter for the Protestant.
Yeah, I have heard that theory, that Islam was sort of started that way, and I know for I'm not sure how long, but for a lot of time, in the early days, Islam was treated as an apostate sect of Christianity. They didn't actually, the Christians didn't actually consider it its own religion, because Muhammad accepted a lot of the same Old Testament stories. They just thought of him as one of these other sects that split away and had these heretical views about Christ and other things that they're doing. Yeah, but it's interesting when it comes to Protestantism, though. I mean, this is getting beyond this one and sort of into the next seal.
Sorry, I didn't mean to be doing that.
No, I mean, it is an interesting history. Martin Luther actually wrote that no one should be fighting against the Turks. That to fight against the Turks was to fight against God, because they were God's appointed means by which to judge the apostasy of the Catholic Church. And it's pointed out that you know, when the Catholic armies were going to go in to destroy the Reformation, they would have to pull their armies back to go off and fight the Turks. And so this continual threat of the Islam attacks against Rome actually allowed Protestantism enough breathing room to to get a foothold and spread.
Is that to say all the Turks were Muslims?
Yeah,
Okay.
referring that to the Ottoman Empire.
Okay. Interesting.
I'll share something here.
That didn't sound very good.
There you go. Just a picture here of the spread of Islam. You know, the first sort of 150 years or so. You can see it started here, in that pink area with you see Mecca and Medina, the two sort of holy cities of Islam. That's what Muhammad managed to take. That, but from that, you know, that's where we got that bottomless pit that opened up, and from there, Islam spread like locusts right across here, taking all Christian lands across North Africa and even into southern Spain and right up here. But it's interesting. When I was watching a documentary on the history of the Sabbath, they spoke about while a lot of Europe was deep in apostasy, further down here in Africa, there was, you know, lots of Christian churches all keeping the Sabbath, all following the Bible. Over in India as well, there was lots of other churches, and so Islam spreading through here actually served to contain the apostasy of the Catholic Church just to those parts of Europe, and prevented it from actually spreading out to the rest of the world, and that allowed Christianity throughout the rest of Africa and India to actually continue to flourish, unaffected by the apostasies of Rome. So that's just another interesting point that, you know, this judgment made a difference. It served to protect those that had the seal of God, as well as judge those that didn't. It made a difference between God's people and those that were apostate. Now, there is a period here. It speaks that they should be tormented 5 months. There in verse 5, and again in verse 10, it says, and they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and they had power was to hurt men 5 months. Now, as I think it was Galen mentioned before, looking at this prophetic time frame, we need to use this day for a year principle. And 5 months, if we use the biblical idea of 30 days for these months, that leads us to 150 literal years from this time period. Now, as we notice with the rise of Islam, Muhammad first did his first major attack of the Arabs, started in 612 AD, and that began this wave of militant Islamic attacks that took over Syria throughout the Byzantine Empire. And
so to stop there,
yep.
So they started his attacks on the Arab nations, you're saying? What faith were they then, or were they just barbarians as such?
I'll share this again. I mean, you had, so throughout Europe here, Can you actually see my cursor on the screen there?
Yes.
You can? Excellent. All right. So throughout Europe, there was a lot of Catholic Christianity. The Byzantine Empire at this stage was still Catholic, although there was some disagreement between Eastern and Western Christianity. But there was a lot of other, you could say, sects of Christianity, like the Nestorian Christians and things like that, were living sort of outside of those that empire in these areas around here, throughout Arabia. And that's again, it's a debatable point of history, but where Muhammad got a lot of his understanding about Christianity was from these other Christians that were living in that area, trying to distance themselves from the papacy. But in that area, there was also a lot of paganism as well. Christianity didn't have a really strong hold on that, so there was you could say, yeah, there was a variety of religious beliefs. So in 612, Muhammad began his attacks and expanded it, as far as you can see, that sort of pink area. Then with his next general, that Abu Bakr, who we read that quote from earlier for that letter, he again expanded up here, and all of this that he took up here was taken away from the Byzantine Empire. And then in the third sort of stage of expansion, coming right through here, again, that was all taken that off Christian empires. But interestingly, despite their sort of swift, conquest, 150 years conquering all of this, they sort of got so far and then just stopped. They couldn't get any further up here into France. They sort of got stopped at Constantinople for a long time. And this goes back to what we're looking about. God had sort of said that, their mission was to only torment those that did not have the seal of God. And so they took over, Spain, but then you've got people like the Albigens, who lived in the south of France here. The Waldenses in the north of Italy, and all these other groups that were sort of scattered out throughout Europe, Bohemia and Germany, that Islam was stopped from going through there and conquering it. And you see that battle there at Taurus. That was a massive battle where Islam tried to push up into that, but they were defeated. And from what I've read, the little bit I've read about these wars, that they say that there's sort of no reason why Islam shouldn't have won that and just carried on to take over Europe. As surprising as their expanses, it's even more surprising that they didn't continue throughout Europe, but God wanted to protect his people. So these other groups that were living there, and that were faithful, having the seal of God, they were not allowed to be hurt. Okay. All right, I'll have to look at that next time to see if I can change my cursor to make it stand out a bit more. So in 612, we've got the beginning of this sort of judgment, the beginning of this Islamic attack starting. And so if that's the start time of this prophecy, we've got to go 150 years into the future and ask the question, when does this finish? When does this plague of this Islamic locusts, this first wave, end? And in 756, there was sort of two Islamic caliphates began to form, and the new one that was founded, actually they founded the city of Baghdad. and moved the capital to there in 762 AD. And so this new capital was, was shifted outside of the former Roman Empire, and with that, this Islamic focus on trying to take over the rest of Europe subsided for a while. And so from Muhammad's first major attack of the Arabs, through to the capital being moved away from the Roman Empire out to Baghdad, we have 150 years. We have this 5 months period that the Byzantine Empire was suffering under this plague. Can someone read verse 6 to 10 of Revelation 9? And someone's just asking the question, is Islam's the locusts? Yes, the armies of Islam are these armies of the locusts that went out and conquered. So actually, I'll just do a little summary. We mentioned that the star falling from heaven to the earth. We saw the star as this prominent leader. When we apply this to Islam, we look at this being Muhammad. That this judgment had this prominent leader at its start. Okay, Muhammad, he was given the keys to this bottomless pit. And he opened that up, and from that, the smoke ascended that blocked out the light. We saw that this smoke caused darkness on the light. It blocked out the truth of the gospel. It brought judgment. This bottomless pit was, it's the place where the beast, one of the three beasts, ascends for one of these satanic powers. It's a hold of demons. And so we have this, Islam being pictured here as this, essentially the satanic power that's risen up, blocks out the light of the gospel, and it goes forth to judge and attack the apostasy and throughout the Byzantine Empire as this judgment upon them for their acts in persecuting God's people. So can someone read that, Revelation 9, verse 6 to 10?
In those days shall you go, Mark. You go.
And in those days shall men seek death and shall not find it, and shall desire to die, and death shall flee from them. And the shapes of the locusts were like unto horses prepared unto battle, and on their heads were as it were crowns like gold, and their faces were as the faces of men, and they had hair as the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions, and they had breastplates, and it were breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was as the sound of chariots of many horses running to battle, and they had tails like unto scorpions, and there were stings in their tails, and their power was to hurt men 5 months.
Now, a lot of language in there. It seems to oscillate between, we've looked at this before, where the prophecy oscillates between symbolic language and literal language. We've seen that locusts being this symbolic judgment, talking about this swarm that would come, these armies of the in Judges, the armies of the children from the east being locusts that descend upon the land. It's a symbolic way to descend to how numerous the army is. But here it describes the locusts and says the locusts are the shapes of horses prepared for battle. And so it seems to be using the symbolicness of the locusts and then literally talking about these horses prepared for battle, the Arabian horses that they rode on as they came in for battle. And as it continues to describe them, as having crowns like gold, faces were the faces of men, hair was the hair of women, and their teeth were as the teeth of lions.
I was just reading the crowns had to do with their turbans. They considered them to be coronets.
Yep. Yes, that is. I've got here a Arabian poem where it speaks of their turbans should be to them instead of diadems. And you know, the diadem, the Greek sort of crown, and it was the turban is the crown of the Arabian. Petra.
Yeah, that's interesting, Ralph, because when I looked up the meaning of crown at some point in scripture, some of the original language was talking about linen wrapped around the head.
And it speaks about their faces are the faces of man and hair like the hair of woman. I didn't realize this, but something that was brought out here is that among the Arabs of the time when this was happening, it was actually customary for them to actually have long hair that they had wrapped up in their turbans. You know, Paul writes in Corinthians you know, in their day speaks about, you know, a woman has long hair, and it's a shame for a man to have long hair. And so that the hair of a woman is, you know, if having long hair, that's something that only women have, that he's speaking of. But in the Arabs, the men wore long hair. And so that's a distinctive describing factor of, you know, these Arab soldiers that came riding on horseback, face of a man, but hair like woman. And when it speaks of teeth of a lion, again, this is where it goes from symbolic, from literal, jumping back to symbolic. You know, teeth of the lion, as we said, lions are a fierce animal, speaks of the ferociousness with which they're going to do battle and fight. And again, wearing breastplates of iron. That was some of the armor that the Muhammadan soldiers were wearing. Yes, Colin.
Can you just quote again that last verse you were reading in Revelations, please?
Sorry, what one was that?
Yeah, you had some mention of the scorpions or something in it, I believe, or horses or something. I was just catching up with my notes.
Oh, yeah, just in Revelation 9, we're just going from verses 6 to 10, just going through that. And then in verse 7, it talks about locusts were as horses prepared for battle.
Thank you. Just catching up to where you are. Cheers.
Excellent. And again, in verse 9, it speaks about, you know, and the sound of their wings were as the sounds of chariots and many horses running to battle. So again, it's this idea of these massive armies being brought up against them. Now, can someone read that last part in Revelation 9, verse 11?
I can read that. They had a king over them, which is the angel of the bottomless pit, whose name in the Hebrew tongue is Abaddon. But in the Greek tongue, his name is Apollyon.
It's a translation in the margin, destroyer.
So Abaddon in the Hebrew, you're saying that in the margin region, that's translated as being the destroyer. And I think it's significant as well. It gives us his name in two different languages, in Greek and in Hebrew, Abaddon and Apollyon, both meaning the destroyer. Now, we've at the beginning we saw that there was this star, this leader of this movement being, you know, Muhammad, the one that started Islam, but it speaks about them having a king over them, this angel of the bottomless pit, being separate from the leader. So the question is, who is the king that is over this Islamic power? Who is this angel of the bottomless pit? If we jump back to Petra.
So is that referring to Satan being behind them? As in their source of power?
Yeah. Yes, I would agree with that. It's interesting if you look at a couple of the other places where Satan is spoken of. If we turn to Ezekiel 28. Now, can someone read Ezekiel 28 verses 1 and 2?
The word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, Son of man, say unto the prince of Tyrus, Thus saith the Lord God, because thine heart is lifted up, and thou hast said, I am a God, I sit in the seat of God, in the midst of the seas, yet thou art a man, and not God, though thou set thine heart as the heart of God.
So who's this speaking about here?
Would this actually be someone actually to do with Tyre? Because later on in verse 12, it says the king of Tyrus. In verse 2, this is only a prince. So a prince does what a king says. So I don't know if this prince of Tyrus would actually be the literal king of Tyre.
That's what I get from that. It's calling him the prince of Tyre, but I mean, it carries on to describe more about him, but it talks about him lifting his heart up, saying that he sits in the seat of God, in the midst of the sea. That's not what someone says if they think there is another power higher than them. That's something that the king says, who thinks he's the highest power there is. He's sitting in the seat of God. He's ruling over everything. So this is actually talking about the literal human king of Tyrus, but it's only referring to him as the prince, because the real king is the one who's ruling over him. Colin.
I just noticed that there, behold, thou art wiser than Daniel. Just listening out for an explanation on that one.
Yes, his wisdom and understanding has got him riches and silver. By thy wisdom and by the traffic, thou hast increased thy riches. And it's just going on talking about how the king of Tyre built himself up into a great nation, but just like Lucifer, his greatness and his wisdom has caused him to rebel and oppose God. And so even though he is the king, the leader of Tyre, it's calling him the prince, because down in verse 11, it introduces us to the real one who's sitting on the throne of Tyre. When it says, moreover, the word of the Lord came unto me, saying, Son of man, take up a lamentation upon the king of Tyrus, and say unto him, Thus saith the Lord, thou sealest up the sum, full of wisdom, perfect in beauty. Thou hast been in Eden, the garden of God. Every precious stone was thy covering, the sardis, topaz, the diamond, the beryl, the oxen, the jasper, the sapphire, the emerald, the carbuncle, gold, the workmanship of thy tablets and of thy pipes was prepared in thee in the day that thou was created. Thou art the anointed cherub that covers. And it goes on talking, and it's clearly there speaking about Satan. Okay, it says he's been in Eden, the garden of God. He's the anointed cherub. And so in the same way here, we've got the human leader is called the prince of Tyre here, but it's saying the real king of Tyre is Satan. He's the one that's ruling over them. Gayleen.
So the fact that the king of Tyre actually has, one might say, an emperor over him, then the fact that he has gotten riches and treasures and wisdom and da-di-da, I'm wondering then, because he has an emperor over him, or called a king in verse 12, then the fact that he is full of wisdom to a point, then it would be gifts from the enemy that allowed the human king of Tyre to gain the riches that he did, that expanded his territory and what have you. Almost an opposite of Solomon. Like, you've got God with Solomon, giving him wisdom and blessing him with riches. It's almost like the king of Tyre ended up on the other side of the coin, but the same thing happening, but not from God, from the enemy. I don't know if that would be right or not, but that's kind of what it looks like.
Merlene?
I'm wondering whether the Prince of Tyre is a literal prince of Tyre, and the king of Tyre is Satan, who is actually controlling the Prince of Tyre. So therefore, you've got the literal again, and then you've got the opposite as well. I mean, what am I trying to say? The
Literal and spiritual.
symbolic. Yeah, the symbolic versus the literal. The prince being the literal and the king being symbolic, as in Satan.
And if we jump to Isaiah 14, we also see a similar thing. In Isaiah 14, verse 1, it's, the burden of Babylon, which Isaiah the son of Amos did see, and he starts prophesying against Babylon. And it goes through chapter 13 and again in chapter 14. In verse 4, it says that they'll take up this proverb against the king of Babylon and say, and in this case, it starts speaking about the king, and then it switches in verse 12. Can someone read Isaiah 14, verse 12 to 14?
How art thou fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning? How art thou cut to the ground, which didst weaken the nations? For thou hast said in thine heart, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also upon the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Interesting that Tyre in some meanings for the original name means rock. So in my head, there's Satan trying to be the counterfeit.
It is interesting. Gayleen.
I was looking at this passage one day, and the thing which occurred to me, given the state of Christianity in general today, with regards to the central doctrine, that although we read it as Petra did, the fact that it sort of came across to my mind that if we read it a slightly different way, as in the stress on a different word, which is, I will ascend into heaven. I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will sit also in the mount of the congregation in the sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. Is that not what he's done today in the minds of most Christians? Is he is like the Most High, like he's done what he said he will do, not like he can't literally do that, as in, he can't be as high as God. That's an impossibility. But as he has actually accomplished the highest position that he can attain in the minds of man, without on a deceptive basis, because he can't come out and say, okay, I'm Satan, worship me, and it was an interesting thought to stress a slightly different word. And when you says, I will be like the Most High, it comes across, because we often see this as his I problem, his I passage. But when you shift it slightly to an I will be like the Most High, it puts a different slant on it, especially with how we see what's happening in the world, with regards to certain teachings and what have you.
It is interesting, like, if you just go back to what we looked at in Ezekiel with Tyre, the guy sitting on the throne of Tyre, he didn't see himself as someone that was, controlled by a satanic agency. He saw himself as he was the man, he was the king, he was the one that was ruling. But I almost think that prophecy simply referring to him as, you're only the prince. would have been a rather large bruise to his ego, because, you know, like you're saying, Satan had deceived him, and Satan had put himself in the number one spot without the king of Tyre even realizing. And same here with Babylon. You know, the king of Babylon thought that this was something that he had done for himself, but Satan had put himself in the number one spot without him even realizing. You know, and like you're saying, Galen, that happens all the time. It's sort of how he's working. And even with, you know, what we said in Revelation 9 with Islam, with the star, this leader being Muhammad, you know, thinking he's following God and starting this religion, whereas we're told that their king is this destroying angel, the angel of the bottomless pit. This satanic leader is the real king of that movement that he started. Petra.
Yeah, good points, Galen. The I will in all of those verses, Satan is clarifying what he chooses. You know, I will to do this, I will to do that. And that fits so much with the satanic do what thou wilt. And most people are only interested nowadays in what they feel like doing and what they choose. So all those cultural patterns, if you like, spiritual cultural patterns are very much there. And this is Satan clearly identifying what he chooses.
Colin.
Thank you. And it even goes on further on in that chapter that thou art the covering, or the covering chair of the anointed chair that covereth, and the story of his fall, and you know, thy heart was lifted up because of thy beauty, and takes us through that representation of who it was. The king of Tyre, like there is versions elsewhere in the Old Testament where it was the trading post, if you like, of everything abominable, and that the merchants of the world, it was their port of call to get all the things that maybe they shouldn't be getting. That's another story again, but I take it to be Lucifer himself.
Yep, absolutely. And so the thing I find interesting about both in Isaiah and Ezekiel, it starts off speaking about this earthly kingdom or ruler, whether it's Babylon or Tyre, and then it introduces Satan as the real king, the real ruler. And we get the same thing here in Revelation 9. We've got the star falling, you know, from heaven to earth. This leader of these people, you know, Muhammad was the leader of Islam, the guy who started it. But at the end, it tells us that the real king of this religion is this angel of the bottomless pit. Okay, his name in Hebrew and Greek is the destroyer, Abaddon and Apollyon. You know, the destroyer is the one who was the real king over this movement. Galen.
I've always found it interesting that, you know, Christianity went out throughout the Middle East, you know, from Israel, you know, the apostles, you know, took it out, and it kind of went out from there, from that part of the world. But where you see Islam in that map that you showed earlier, and even today, it's taken over where Christianity once was. Yeah, it's completely displaced the religion of the area, the original one, which is, you know, God-given Christianity. It's interesting that one has replaced the other in the original place where it started, you know?
Yeah, although I would add something to that Islam didn't replace, that the Christianity as a God-given religion. The papacy replaced Christianity, and then Islam replaced the papacy in those areas. And a thought that came up in something I read was that it was interesting that God used Islam to sort of confine and overthrow a lot of Christianity in that area. Because although Islam, it speaks about the smoke causing darkness, blocking out the light of the gospel, all that stuff that Islam did. For all of that they didn't have idols. They didn't worship, idols. They didn't have any of this other stuff. There was a lot of the apostasy and abominations that was going on in Christianity at the time that Islam didn't have. And it's interesting, he used Islam to judge them. And the thing I was reading just asked the question, could it be that out of the two religions, Islam was the less offensive, and the fact that in those areas God used it to replace Catholicism?
I don't know if the one being less offensive than the other would still hold true today. I don't know.
And well, the other question you've got to ask as well is, if this strong power like Islam never arose, what would have stopped the Catholicism spreading through all of Africa, and all over to India? What would have stopped its continual expansion? Because the rise of Islam prevented that. And for a long time, Christianity in the lower parts of Africa and India was able to flourish. There was a lot of Sabbath keepers in those areas. If you I watched a documentary on I think it was just called The Seventh Day, and it covered a lot of that history. And it wasn't until later on with the Jesuits that managed to sort of sail around the Muslim empires, actually went in there, caused wars to actually get a lot of the Sabbath keepers killed and try to bring in the Catholic religion.
Ethiopia is a classic example of that, isn't it?
Yeah. Yep, it is. Yeah, and so as much as it's a case that Islam here is pictured as being this satanic religion that it ascended sort of out of this bottomless pit, it was still used by God to attack the apostasy in Christianity in order to protect his true people. Okay, see you, Margaret. God bless.
Bye.
Petra.
Interesting that the underhanded method of ruling, Satan hiding behind people, and even in heaven, Satan wasn't outright and honest about his plans, his agenda, but Satan hiding behind leaders, that's still very much a very, very common form of leadership amongst people. There's the public figureheads, but they are rarely the actual power behind things. They're just a figurehead that if they get too far out of line, they can be bumped off and another one can be put there, and the powers that be are behind that. So interesting how Satan's method of rulership is copied.